He is the head football coach at TCU in Fort Worth, and a good friend of the show, Sonny Dykes, joins us on 365 Sports. I'm David Smoak with Paul Catalina and Craig Smoak. Hey, how you been? Good to see you. I know you probably didn't check off every box you needed during spring, but how many did you check off, and was it successful?
Yeah, good to see you guys. Thanks for having me, as always. Appreciate it. Yeah, you know what? We had a good spring. We had every football coach in the country probably feels this way, but we had a very productive 15 practices. Our guys got a lot better. We have a lot of experience coming back. Had a lot of new faces. You know, we had a big group of high school players that graduated early that went through spring ball, and some transfers as well. So a lot of new faces, but a lot of returning guys as well that have a ton of experience. A lot of leadership on this team, a lot of maturity. So really liked the group and felt like we had, really 15 very productive practices.
So, your offense started to really click in last year. Josh Hoovers really, found his groove after some early turnover issues. What is it like building off of a season like last year as opposed to where you had to stop and start a little bit in 2023?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, we had a lot of momentum to end the season. We started playing better. We were sitting there at 3-3, and it was pretty easy to see why we were not playing particularly well and not winning football games. We just kept turning the ball over. And, we had 12 turnovers in a 3-game span, and you're just not going to win in college football if you do that. So, we had an open date, thankfully, before we went and played Utah on the road, and it was a big game for us. And, we sat down, talked to our guys about the importance of not turning the ball over, getting some turnovers defensively, and did a good job to end the season. I think we won 6 of our last 7 games. It got hot, and really learned how to win football games, and had some hard fought ones down the stretch. And the big thing for us is we quit turning it over, as you mentioned. And, I thought Josh really played well down the stretch, settled in, started playing with a lot more confidence. I think, as you said, our offense started to click, and we feel really good about the returning group that we have coming back and our ability to build off of that foundation.
Coach, when it comes to the turnovers and your quarterback there, Josh Hoovers, I know some were picks. There were some fumbles as well. Some are not always the quarterback's fault either, but kind of how do you work on turning that down a little bit and protecting the football a little bit more? What are those conversations and the approach like?
Well, it's like anything else. You get what you emphasize as a coach. And so we had to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, look, this is clearly a problem. What can we do to address it and fix it? And so we just started talking about ball security all the time, and started, doing everything we could do to make sure that we emphasize that from the very beginning, from the moment we walked on the field to the moment we walked off, and just became a point of emphasis for us. As you said earlier, Josh just started to grow up a little bit. He didn't go through spring ball last year. He was injured. And so, he was still learning. He was still getting those reps. I think the big mentality shift occurred in terms of, we just quit playing desperate. Our defense started to play a little bit better. It all happened together. And as our defense played better, we had to play less desperate on offense. We could, do a better job taking care of the ball. We had a lot of weird things happen. I mean, we had some games where, just some really, really strange things happened as far as turning the ball over, and those things kind of quit happening. And again, a lot of it had to do with what we emphasize, and our guys did a really good job of buying into that, understanding how important it was, and following through with that plan.
Did you ever think, and I hope you don't mind me asking this, that other schools have their players come and go, that when somebody else has somebody leave, that all of a sudden you have somebody, and a great quarterback, a young quarterback in high demand? And was that in any way any kind of distraction the last week of spring?
What a distraction for us, just because we know what kind of person Josh is and how committed he is to TCU, and how much he loves his teammates and loves playing here and being a Horned Frog. And so I think that makes you feel a little bit more at ease. I mean, you still never know. There's a lot of people throwing around a lot of money, and it's hard, for a 20, 21-year-old young man to pass up that kind of life-changing money in some cases. But Josh was all about playing at TCU. He had some opportunities. Some people reached out. There was kind of a high-profile quarterback that moved on, and Josh had an opportunity because of that. And, he elected to stay here, never really considered it. And, I think that's the one thing that we really like that we have going right now at TCU is I think we have a great culture in our program. And, I don't know that our guys are for sale. And so I think these guys enjoy going to school here. They want to be part of this team. We're like everybody else, and we're fortunate. I mean, our players are making money. We're fortunate that when the revenue sharing thing takes place, when that shift occurs, we're going to fund that to the max. And so our players are going to be well compensated. But that's not the basis of our program. We're not out talking about money with players all the time. That's not the kind of players we recruit. We say it all the time as a program. Recruiting's like fishing. Whatever kind of bait you use, that's the kind of fish you catch. We don't park, fancy cars in our stadium, and we don't have jet airplanes and all that silly stuff. Guys come to TCU because they want to play football. They want to get a great degree. They want to be around good people. They want to play in a good culture. They want to live in Fort Worth, and a city that's growing and provides a lot of opportunities for graduates when they're done playing football. They want to be developed. We feel like we've got one of the top strength and conditioning programs in the country, one of the best nutrition programs in the country. We feel like we're sending a lot of players to the NFL that have come in here and gone through the process and developed. And so there's a lot of reasons that guys want to stay. And if we're doing our job, we're not going to have to worry about too many of those things.
Coach, is one of the harder things now, because I understand that there's a difference between, like $400,000 and $900,000 if that's the offer that somebody's going to get. But the difference between, say, $250 and $300, if the $250 place is better for you developmentally, $50,000 is not going to make or break you for a lifetime. And if you're in a place that works and you're making good money, like, is it hard to kind of teach young kids that lesson of like, look, I understand that this place came in and said they beat our offer by X amount of dollars that, over 10 years of your life, it'll be gone. Like, it's hard to explain, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Look, young people are no different than adults. I mean, you guys have coworkers and people that you've known your whole life that if they get offered $1 more, they'll leave a perfectly great situation and take a chance and go someplace else across the country, away from friends and family, whatever it may be, for $1 more. Other people, that kind of stuff doesn't move the needle. I mean, there's more of a premium put on, am I being developed? Do I like the people I'm around? Do I feel like I'm respected? Am I getting a great education? What's my quality of life? All these things are factors. And I think sometimes we as adults want to simplify this and just say, look, it's all about the money. I don't think it's about the money at all, quite frankly. I mean, that's part of the conversation, but I think it's a small part of it. And all of us are the same way. I mean, when you have success, you have opportunities, and there's been coaches on our staff, myself included, after 2022, after we played for a national championship in year one, that had opportunities to leave and go make more money at places that are perceived to be bigger schools, maybe. But, we stayed here. All of us, most of our coaches have stayed here. The guys are happy here. They get to coach. I'm not micromanaging them. They get to be around great people day in, day out. The thing that we talk about the most here is being very careful about who we let into the building. There's just good people. We have a good work environment, and, we're fortunate to get to live in Fort Worth and get to represent TCU. It's a fantastic place to go to school. I have a 16-year-old daughter, and I'm hoping she goes to TCU. And so it's just a very unique place, and we're fortunate to be here. And I think we have been around enough to appreciate it for what it is.
Coach, we got to talk to Corey Coleman just a couple of weeks ago, and one of many familiar faces on your staff. He was an electric player, and then obviously NFL didn't go the way that he hoped for, but he seems like he's really found a spark with this coaching thing. Just your thoughts on bringing him on board and what you've seen from him, and your thoughts on Corey the coach.
Yeah, I knew Corey the player, obviously. Saw him play at Baylor and saw what kind of player he was. Didn't really know him as a person. We interviewed him, and I got to be around him a little bit, and I was just incredibly impressed with his energy, his positive attitude, his ability to connect with young people. He had a hunger to really immerse himself in football and get into coaching. I mean, it's a hard way to make a living. There's a lot of uncertainty kind of in this profession, but Corey took it all on. He's just excited to be here. And he's had a huge impact on our young receivers and has really done a good job developing those guys and continuing to improve them. And, he loves recruiting. He's got an energy for it. He's got an ability to connect with young people. And so I think he's got a really bright future in the coaching profession.
And, of course, you've got Malcolm Kelly, who's fantastic at what he does. And Corey mentioned him when we had him on just 2 or 3 weeks ago. For former players who were stars, whether in college and maybe the NFL, is it easier or more difficult for them to coach? Because sometimes it came easy to them. Not all of them. They worked hard too. But does that make sense?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. Unfortunately, I guess, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, I didn't have to worry about that. I was not a good athlete, not a very good player. So, look, sometimes, like you said, it is easy, for guys, and maybe sometimes they don't understand, all the minute details that make a difference, because, it's like football is like anything else. I mean, there are some guys that are just really, really incredibly gifted. And the game is relatively easy for them. Most people, it's not. Most people, they have to work incredibly hard to play at a really, really high level. And Corey, I think, is one of those guys that, he had such a great college career. It probably didn't go the way he envisioned in the NFL. And I think there's probably a little bit of a hunger and a desire to really dive into the details now that he's gone through both kind of experiences. And so, he, as I said earlier, he's going to be a heck of a coach, really bright guy. But there is kind of that weird part of it sometimes when you're an exceptional athlete, sometimes the game is different for you than it is for others. And, most football players in college and most football players in the NFL, it's a grind. I mean, they're very talented, but it is a grind and it is very difficult. And for these guys to perform at a high level, they have to be very detailed. They have to do an incredible amount of work off the field, away from the building, taking care of their body and developing themselves a lot more than people realize, I think.
Coach, you've got a mostly veteran offensive line, but you've got a couple guys stepping in there. Ryan Hughes at left tackle, Ben Taylor Whitfield at right tackle. How comfortable are you now after spring with those guys as your tackle bookends and the overall combo of the offensive line?
Yeah, I really like those two guys. I mean, Ryan's played for us as a true freshman this year. Mm-hmm. Really came on and played well at the end of the year. He's one of those guys that I don't think any of us, when we recruited him, thought he was going to play as a true freshman. He just got better and better and better. He was already he fit the bill physically. I mean, he's a huge guy. He's athletic, all the stuff. But sometimes it takes a while mentally to get there. And he just jumped right in from day one, had a lot of confidence, and got in the mix and carved out a role for himself as a true freshman. And we moved him to left tackle. He really solidified that position for us. I thought he had an outstanding spring. And then Ben Whitfield is one of those guys that's very, very talented. He's a big guy. He's athletic. His best football is in front of him. He's got a really bright future. So we're really, really happy at those two tackle positions, and we're starting to develop some depth behind those guys as well.
I know that Paul asked you just kind of how you felt about spring earlier and all that, but all these big picture questions in college football right now, where are you on spring football as it currently is and has been? And obviously a lot of teams are canceling the big, to-dos, the 60,000, let's sell out spring. Where are you in terms of spring ball? And are you of the opinion that, hey, we can do some cross scrimmaging and that would be good for us? Or where are you with that?
Yeah, look, I think spring football is incredibly important to your program. And I think especially in today's world, because you're going to have a lot of new players that join in January. We had 27 new players that went through spring ball with us that were either high school kids or transfers. And so it was a big group. And every one of the reps was going to be really, really important for those guys. And so it was really, really important to our development as a program. We had some young players that didn't get to play that much last year that had an opportunity to get a lot of reps in the spring. And so it really is important to building your roster. The one thing I think you have to consider is the timing of the portal. If the portal continues to be late April, then you can make an argument about, and there's still going to be the kind of movement there is in the portal. You could make the argument that maybe you do some OTAs once your roster is set in June and all the transfer stuff is over. You could make the argument about doing something like that. My hope is that the spring portal goes away. If it goes to one portal in December, like in early January. And that's kind of what I'm hearing could happen. If that's what happens, then again, I think spring makes a lot more sense. I think you're going to see people at that point go back to the traditional spring football games and that kind of thing. Right now with what's going on in the world, if you've got a backup receiver that goes out there and catches, 12, 15 balls in the spring game or something, all of a sudden they're going to come into your office on Monday and say, hey, I want more money, or I'm going to go in the portal and see what kind of market value that I have and all these kind of things. And so, if you have a little bit more stability by only having one portal, then I think the emphasis returns to spring football.
Would you ever like any kind of an OTA setup? Chris Kleiman brought that up to us back in Vegas and has said it a couple of different times. Or if it does move back to just January only, I get that. But is that something you already pretty much have anyway during the summer?
It is. Yeah. We you're allowed a certain amount of time to work with your players, and you want to maximize that the best you can without overdoing it. I think that in the college football world, a decade ago, you worried about your players having too much time off. Now you worry about them having too little time off. There's just the calendar shifted. These guys work incredibly hard. They train year round. A lot of times it's incredible to think of this, but we practice in the morning, and then we have players sometimes that go and do work after they get out of class in the afternoon, after practicing for 3-4 hours earlier in the day. And so, these guys are used to working hard. They're used to working with coaches and all the kind of stuff outside of the building, really. And so, anyway, it's an interesting time. But I think the OTAs are important as well. You can get so much done with your football team, so much teaching of scheme and all that, so many opportunities to have meetings, that what it does is it takes the emphasis off of the on the field work, that takes place during spring ball. And maybe you don't have to hit as much. You don't have to put as many players at risk as you normally do when you're trying to install an offense or defense, in fall camp. And so it prepares your football team, and I think takes a little bit of a load off of your players if you handle it the right way.
Sonny, my last question. Thanks for your time as always. There are these roster limit things out there, the house settlement or whatever. Have you had to talk to any players about not having room? And with that still not done, if you did, would that be retroactive to anybody that was going to be a part of your program that you said there was no room and they could come back? That seems very confusing to me.
Yeah, no, it is. That's the hardest part of all this that we're dealing with. I mean, I think that's why we're all hoping that this settlement gets signed quickly and everybody knows what's going on, because we have a bunch of players that are good college football players that want to go to quality schools and get a great education that are sitting there waiting right now going, well, look, I want to go to TCU, but I'm not sure if I can play football. If I can't play football, then I might try to go to school B. And so all these kids, their futures are kind of up in the air right now. And some of our walk-ons as well. I mean, you hate it for guys that have been here a year, 2 years, 3 years, even 4 years in some cases, and have paid so much into this football program. And all of a sudden you have to sit down with those guys and say, look, we may not be able to bring you back. So there's a lot of balls in the air right now. I don't know that anybody knows where they're all going to come down and how it's going to play out. My hope is that this will gradually happen. Maybe they go to 125 year one, maybe 120, and gradually work their way down to 105 if that's what they want to do. But I think that would be much more of a fair way to do it, because you do. Look, walk-ons are the fabric of any good college football team. Those guys are the hardest workers. Those guys are the best team guys. Those guys are the most willing to do whatever it takes to help the team. And to eliminate those guys, I think is a really big mistake in one fell swoop. And I understand why they want to get the roster under control from a cost standpoint and all the different things that, those 20, 25 players at the bottom of the roster, they're expensive part of college football. And so I get wanting to trim the roster, but I think we should do it slowly and make sure we take care of those guys that have taken care of us.
We will see you at the Star in Frisco at Media Days in July. Thank you very much, Coach, for your time as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Sonny.
I'll see you guys in July.
Yes, sir. TCU football coach Sonny Dykes with us on 365 Sports. We appreciate his time. And yet another coach